Whoops-a-daisy. I kind of got into Warhammer 40K. I don't know how it happened either. I blame YouTube. For whatever reason, I started seeing YouTube videos for a channel called Play on Tabletop, in which they would play Warhammer 40K. It was a lot of dice rolling. It was a lot of like, okay, like what is this? How does this work? Why is it structured this way? Like a lot of the game design things in my head, trying to figure out like what was the point of any of this and why wasn't it a video game and like why did they do certain things and watched those for a while, stopped watching them, eventually came back and started watching them again and just kind of like got interested in it and looked into like why it worked and how it worked, and Warhammer started trying to make it easier for people that didn't know what the fuck was going on to like get into it. So with 10th edition, they simplified a lot of things that made it a lot easier to understand what was happening. So now I think I've been exposed to Warhammer before. I, you know, was the kind of person I look like in the late 90s in Indiana, which meant that I knew some nerds in middle school that played the game. Like I remember in middle school reading some of the fantasy Warhammer books, and I'm not saying like this is an actual story. No, this was like the books that had the rules and the lore and the whatchamahoozits, and they played fantasy. And I think I may have read like a vampire counts one or something. Like that whole fantasy game doesn't exist anymore. They play some new thing. It's a long story. We're not going to get into it here. Anyway, I also think I played like what must have been some kind of starter set for Warhammer 40K in like sixth grade at like an after school program or something. Like one of the counselors would play like the Star Wars role playing game or other things. He would just, you know, we're there, may as well pass the time. So a few of us would play this thing, and I don't have a lot of memories of it. There's kind of this image in my head of like some terrain or something, and like some red guys and some blue guys, and various like weapons and little like cardboard things that showed range and explosives and whatever. Like I didn't memorize it that much, but cut to a shockingly long amount of time later, and I start looking into it, and I guess it starts appealing to me for some reason. I still think this would be way easier as a computer game, and I know there's a lot of Warhammer 40K computer games, but it's not like the model thing. So somehow I have decided to like go into this despite not being someone with the greatest like artistic skill necessarily. Like language arts, sure. Writing, sure. Videos and talking, whatever. Yeah, I have terrible handwriting, um, and I'm not generally that artistic when it comes to like hand-eye coordination and physical stuff, but working on it. Um, so 40K. First of all, the setting is kind of silly. It is technically a satire, but it has probably evolved away so much from its satire that people don't understand that it's satire, and there's a lot of like kind of like questionable fascist overtones, blah blah blah. I'm definitely aware of that. I've definitely looked into it a lot, and a lot of that has to do with the Space Marines and how they have to be like the poster boys or whatever. The Space Marines do not appeal to me. They just look like a whole bunch of dudes in armor. They just look like a whole bunch of guys with guns, and that's not really my jam. All right, like so. I tried to figure out what was my jam, which involved an Excel spreadsheet and a lot of looking at the rules, because I guess at one point in time they didn't tell you the rules for free. So like you wouldn't know what was good or anything, which seems like an ass backwards way of like getting people into the game. But for whatever reason, for 10th edition, they started off with the rules for free, so you could look up all the data sheets and whatever and figure out what guys you liked the most. And there was a few different things. I knew I was probably interested in one of the alien forces, the non-human forces. I guess I guess if you wanted to sum it up, there's a few different types of armies in 40K. There's like Space Marines, which are dudes with guns. Wasn't interested in. There's a whole lot of different types of Space Marines, and they just look like different colored dudes with guns. Not my jam. There's armies of the Imperium, which are friends of Space Marines. Some of them were a little more interesting. Sisters of Battle was one of the finalists for, hey, I'm going to look into this army. Sisters of Battle, one of the only female-led factions. They were kind of like, hey, what if Space Marines were interesting with like various artistic choices? They've got someone that's essentially like an archangel. They've got a a missile launcher that is essentially a drivable organ player. Like that, those are interesting choices to be made. But it seemed like kind of intimidating from like a painting situation because God knows I'm going to have some trouble with that. And you had to buy a lot of them, and I just was less interested in some of the models, so I didn't go with that one. There was those are the friends to the Space Marines. There's also the Chaos faction, which is a lot of demons and corrupted Space Marines. Some of those were more interesting, but some of them were also guys with guns with spikes on their shoulders, and yeah, less on that. And there was alien factions. I was pretty sure I was going to choose some kind of alien faction. They just seemed to have a lot more variety, a lot more interesting choices being made with art design, a lot more interesting tactics. So looking in that a lot. One of my other finalists was the Necrons. Necrons are essentially, hey, what if sci-fi undead race meant Terminators and like trapped space gods and stuff like that? A lot of interesting units there, but it just didn't end up being my finalist. Like I probably could have gone that way, but for whatever reason, just didn't appeal to me that much. I don't know if it was too slow or just something about it made me say no. I ended up with the Space Elves or the Eldari, specifically the Yanari, but I'll talk about that in a second. There's essentially Space Elves, normal Space Elves, and evil Space Elves called the Drukhari, and those were both appealing to me. I realized that you could kind of have it both ways if you have a certain character named Yvraine, Space Elf Lady. I really liked the look of the Space Elf Lady. I liked the fact that you could dabble onto both sides, so that kind of became my route to take. So the Eldari, Space Elves. They kind of remind me of the Protoss from StarCraft. They have a lot in common with them. Ancient race with psychic powers that kind of screwed things over for themselves. Their dead go into war machines. Like, yeah, I think there's some commonalities with these Space Elves. So the plastic model kits are like stupidly expensive, and I was pretty sure I was going to do a start collecting box. A start collecting box, or sorry, they're called combat patrols now. Combat patrols are basically like a bundle kit, so they're obviously more expensive than an individual unit, but you get like a quarter of an army, and I think they've balanced it now so that you can actually play a combat patrol against somebody else with a combat patrol, which is another way to onboard someone in a more simple and less financially taxing way. I have not gotten my start collecting box. Sorry, I have not gotten my combat patrol yet, but I was Christmas shopping for my family and randomly ran into a already opened but still all there start collecting box. This used to be their old value boxes before they replaced them. So these are the Ghosty Boys Space Elves. So everything that has the white helmet is a dead space elf whose soul has been put in a machine for reasons I will not go into here. It involves a demon and bad decision making. But the Dragoons from StarCraft of the Warhammer 40k world. So this is their old value box, and there was 15% off sale at the place I went to, which meant this thing that used to retail for 90 or 80 or something like that was like 67. This has four different units in it. It's got a Farseer, this guy, who is kind of the probably one of the important things in the army in that it can essentially change dice rolls for you, which is an important thing to do in a game involving dice. So that was on my army list of things I wanted to get. He's also in the combat patrol, but oh well. This guy is a Wraith Lord, is essentially the space elf version of like a walker or a tank kind of thing. I don't think it's specifically a tank, but like a beefier thing with a lot of guns on it. It's also got a sword. These are his little buddies, the Wraith Guard, and that is a Warwalker. Warwalker wasn't really on my list, but my list involved this guy, and that guy. So that made sense for $67. Now I will tell you how much they charge for these on manufacturer's suggested retail price. So the Farseer is like $32, I think. $32 for one dude. Seems like a lot, frankly. These 5 Wraith Guard are $60. Like 5 of them combined are $60. Wraith Lord up there is $60. You can probably pretty easily find it for $50. And the Warwalker is like about $40 or so, something like that. So what was that? If you bought this from Games Workshop for some reason, paying as much as they're demanding, this would be like $180, something like that, which is ridiculous. Obviously, that thought process of trying to find value by getting a value box when the cheapest way to play Warhammer would be to not and just like not spend the money. But this was my initial purchase. I essentially walked into the store to buy stuff for other people and ended up buying myself maybe my Christmas and or birthday gift from my family. But that's what these guys are. I will probably start with the Warwalker first because it's the thing I care about least and am least worried about screwing up when I try to paint it. I'm not going with red, but if I ever paint it, I will let you know what that is. Now, or what that paint scheme is. Now, you got to put them together, you got to paint them, and then you can play, right? I have never put any of these things together. I have put together Gundam models, though. Put together some Gundam models in like probably the early 2000s. So I'm told that there's a lot less parts, and after opening up the box, yeah, I discovered there are a lot less parts. So like a gun, for example, would be like an entire thing. Or like one piece, where in Gundam you might have multiple pieces put together, and the legs might be a lot more intricate. So that's nice. Some of the aspects of putting it together and clipping them off the screw and everything else are kind of familiar from putting together Gundams, but I never had to glue anything with Gundams or paint them. So that's kind of the big scary thing. It was suggested to me that I should like paint something else first to figure out if I know what the hell I'm doing. Spoiler alert, I kind of don't. But I bought some clearanced WizKid models. These are essentially little miniatures that have already been primed, and you don't have to put them together, and you just have to paint them. So I got a few of them on clearance to figure out like how to do any of this crap using some craft paints that we have at my house in order to not spend any money. This was the first attempt. I think he's supposed to be something from Magic the Gathering, as like a changeling, something from the Norse-inspired Magic plane. I've learned a lot on each of the things I've tried to paint. This was actually like just kind of is this color thing something that I actually want to do for the army? And yeah, this is kind of the color scheme I want to go with, that light green and like the lilac thing here. So we'll see if I second guess that, and then like an orange being like a tertiary color. But I didn't hate the color scheme. What I learned on this one is that I had no idea how to thin paints at all, and in fact was overly thinning them at first, and I definitely fuzzed out some of the details, especially around the face and the horns and stuff like that. So, definitely didn't know what I was doing there. Edge highlighting, kind of fun. No idea how to shadow or highlight or anything like that, though. But basic color scheme, sure, fine. The second one I did, it was from that same, it's from the same set with the changeling. This is a different type of changeling. It's got wings, and I'm sure you can't see this on camera at all, which is fine because it looks bad. Believe me. This one I kind of liked the result of this one. My daughter picked out the colors. She was like pink and orange. I was like, fine, whatever. Um, Pink and orange with blue and some tealish, greenish stuff. I think I did a better job on this one. I did some. It's not finished and probably won't ever will be, but I did some dry brushing on this one, and that actually kind of tied it together. Like I liked the end result of all this like spooky dry brush stuff to make it look like this otherworldly thing. Like this one kind of turned out okay. I wouldn't be totally embarrassed if I was playing a game and I put something on the table that looked like that. I might be embarrassed about the color scheme, but that's fine. That's just something a kid picked out. I probably dry brushed a little bit too much on the front, but it kind of cheated its way into giving it some kind of texture, which uh, is a lesson I learned. I guess texture being good is a lesson I learned in college when I was working in the scene shop. So not terrible. I still don't totally understand. I still didn't totally understand thinning paint on this one. The third one I got was a little dude, little ninja guy from Magic the Gathering, and this one I am embarrassed by. You're not going to be able to see all the details because of the camera, but this one was frustrating. Details, very hard. I've since gotten a smaller brush. My wife had a smaller brush that definitely would have helped. If you can see the little masky thing, it kind of makes him look like a superhero. I attempted to draw in his eyes and then utterly failed. So it was like, fine, you're a superhero now. Now you're got a Robin-esque mask. I think this one, for one thing, I think maybe some of the, I don't know if I had to touch it too much because it's so small that my oil in my hands kind of made the paint come off, or it just wasn't that well primed. But I, it was more blue, more uniform until I put on a different color to kind of make it stand out. But it's still probably my worst one. At this point in time, I'm not fuzzing out the details on him as much. Like you can see all the lines on his back where like various equipment is or his abs are, stuff like that. And I was definitely doing that on the first model, so I'm getting better when it comes to that. But the detail work is still very hard, and we'll see how I do with a small brush on the actual models. But this one is like too small for me to really handle that great. The last one I've tried is this thing. This is I don't know if he's from D&D or something. It was a clearanced one for me to test painting skills on. Conception, it's not done, obviously. And if you can pick out details, you'll see that it definitely isn't done. This one, I think I did a good job on picking out colors and things like that. Getting with a detail brush, I was getting better up here with like working around the cloak and in between his legs and stuff like that. I was able to put white on his body, on the statue's body, in a way that didn't fuzz out the details. So again, getting better on not fuzzing out the details by messing up the paint and making it overly chalky. But brush strokes, big problem on here. Succeed a lot, especially on the underside, which I didn't try. I basically learned that, like, hey man, long flat or even curved surfaces might be a problem with brush strokes. So my wife was giving me some advice on that after I did this, which might help with the next time. But I wouldn't be totally embarrassed. I'm not totally embarrassed about this one. I feel like I did some things right. there's a water effect on here where I essentially put blue on here, and then my wife had a see-through blue that made onto the top of the water. So that looks pretty good. Still working out a lot of the details on this, but I got like, I don't know if this is a secondary or tertiary color that I matched up there with like octopus arms and the cloak. So not embarrassed about this one. I do not think I am ready to like, you know, turn these $30 pieces of plastic or whatever into a painted thingamabob. But I do have another. Once I get the actual paint for the models, like I was using old craft paint that we had like lying in the basement for God knows how long. So coming at it from a little bit of a handicap there. But when I get model paint, I'm not going to be ready to do that. I think I'm definitely going to test out the model paint on a different clearanced cheapo model as well to see if A, I like the color scheme, B, I've gotten any better at knowing what I'm doing. But that's me getting into Warhammer. I chose the Space Elves. I, for some reason, decided I'm gonna pick an army in this like grim dark macho bullshit nonsense of a universe and then paint them like an Easter egg. That was apparently where I wanted to go with that. So we'll see. The army I have planned out essentially it comes in 4 blocks. You want a 2,000 point army, and the start collecting boxes and the combat patrols are generally around 500. So this one at $67 is like stupidly cheap for a quarter of an army, and then the start collecting box will probably be like 112 or so, 136, depending on if it's on sale or not at a secondhand dealer or whatever, not the main website. So that's 1,000 points. And then the whole point of the army was that I was doing the dark elf light elf thing. So the dark elves have another start collecting box, which is another whatchamahoos it there, and then fill that out with a couple random characters that kind of make the whole like dark elf, light elf, dark elf, regular elf thing work. And that's like my plan for a 2,000 point army. So if you know 40K, I'm doing Yanari, I'm doing Yvrain and all that stuff, and then I'm cheapening out by doing as many start collecting boxes as possible in order to like make an army that's not a bajillion dollars. So how long will it take me to paint any of these things? I don't know. I got 2 kids and a job now, so it could be like a really long time. If you're interested in that, or you play 40K and want to advise me on how much of a dumbass I'm going to be when I start, leave a comment. If people like care, I'll show you like my stuff in progress. It'll be probably hilarious. So entertainment. Oh yeah, place a bet on how long it takes me to paint my first model. It's going to be the Warwalker. So 1 model, 1 unit, and I don't know what I'm doing with painting, so my bet is I will have it done by February. We'll see.